seconds rather. Alrighty, I'm going to go ahead and get us started. So good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Breaking Down Barrier Methods hosted by HCET. My name is Jordan Murch. I'm the Training and Community Engagement Manager at HCET, and I will be facilitating the webinar today. I would like to briefly introduce you to healthcare education and training. HCET's mission is to provide comprehensive program development, education, and training to improve reproductive and sexual health outcomes. We are an organization of passionate people who are proactive in our belief that access to evidence-based, medically accurate reproductive and sexual health education, training, and care is a fundamental right. This webinar does have closed captions available if you need them. To enable them on your screen, please click Live Transcript at the bottom of your screen, then click, Show Subtitle, and then you can change the settings by clicking Subtitle Settings. For more information and to keep up to date with HCET events, please be sure to follow, sorry about that, I think I have automatic transitions going on. Please be sure to follow HCET on these various social media platforms and visit our website. Now I will quickly review some housekeeping information. A link to complete an event evaluation will be sent to your email following this webinar. Your feedback is greatly appreciated. Archived presentations and a list of upcoming events can be viewed on our website. And if you have any technical difficulties during this presentation, please contact us at updates@hcet.org, which is that email listed on the screen. In order to receive nursing contact hours for this webinar, you must do the following: attend the entire webinar, complete the participant evaluation and post-test, and then complete the nursing contact hour form and email it to kbradford@hcet.org. The presenter of this presentation does not disclose any actual, potential, or perceived conflicts of interest. Throughout the presentation, we do encourage you to send your questions via the Q&A box. So to send a question at any time during the presentation, please send it through that Q&A. This just ensures that everyone in the webinar can view your question, and questions can also be sent anonymously if you choose. And now I would like to introduce our presenter for today's webinar, Dr. Daniel Stec. Dr. Daniel Stec, a native Hoosier, was formerly trained as a family nurse practitioner and certified nurse midwife at Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia. Since returning to Indiana, he has spent most of his time in the sexual and reproductive health and HIV arenas. Daniel's particular areas of expertise are helping remove stigma and fear from sexually transmitted infections and working with healthcare providers to improve their sexual health skills and knowledge. He is currently working as a telehealth prep provider for QCare Plus and is the president of a new Indiana-based nonprofit called Y'all, which helps fill care gaps for the queer and trans community. Without further ado, I will pass things over to Dr. Stec to kick us off.
Thank you, Jordan. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. I did a couple things I wanted to mention before I jump into the slides today. Jordan mentioned that a lot of my background is in HIV, in HIV world and PrEP and HIV prevention. And today is actually World AIDS Day, which is why I'm wearing red. So I just wanted to point that out today as a day to recognize all of the lives that have been lost through the HIV and AIDS epidemic over the last several decades, as well as all the work that is being done around the world to continue to find new treatments, ways to prevent, and eventually end the HIV epidemic. Also, with that being said, I also wanted to take a quick moment of silence for the lives that were lost and affected just a few days ago in Colorado Springs in the shooting there, and in particular, especially on World AIDS Day. So if you could just join me in one moment of silence for all the lives that have been affected in recent events. Okay, thank you so much for that. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and jump into my slides here. So give me a second to transition. While I'm doing that, as Jordan mentioned, we've got the Q&A part. Please submit questions If there's any that I'm able to answer while we go through, I will do that, but I might hold, we do have a section at the end there for questions, but feel free to submit them at any time because I want them to be fresh. Okay. Jordan, is everything looking good on your end?
Yep, looks great.
Okay. And we will go ahead and get started. So today we're going to be talking about barrier methods. Now, barrier methods really are broken down into a couple things, a couple different categories here that we're going to get into. But before we jump into any specifics, we're going to go into some basics here first. Give you a little bit more background on myself, just so you know where I'm coming from and how the viewpoint that I come from as well. So as she mentioned, I'm a midwife and family nurse practitioner. So I worked for several years in clinical practice, doing primarily gynecologic and reproductive health care, including all forms of birth control. I then moved into a family planning director role, where I worked with nurse practitioners and nurses in various settings around central Indiana, related to family planning services and birth control access. I've also worked as HIV and PrEP specialist, most recently, and for the last several years as well. I'm also a sexuality counselor and educator, currently pursuing certification through AAHIVS at the moment. So I bring in some of that lens as well. And as Jordan mentioned, I'm also a board member of the nonprofit Y'all, which serves the queer and trans community throughout Indiana. A little bit more about me personally. I do identify as queer and I use he or they pronouns. I am a native Hoosier from Indiana, born and raised, and other than my time in Atlanta and a lot of traveling around the country and the world, and spent most of my time here in Indiana. I did want to recognize that I am currently presenting from occupied Miamia, Kaskaskia, and Kickapoo land here in the Indianapolis area. And a little bit socially, again, I'm a sake specialist. There's actually a certification for that. It's a lot of fun. I'm also a couch surfing host, so I host people in my home from all over the world. And I also, like I said, travel a lot myself. So just to give you a little bit of viewpoint of where I'm coming from with this information. Okay, so what exactly we're going to be talking about today. Our goal is to increase your knowledge and comfort with barrier methods to improve public health awareness and use of these methods. So our objectives, by the end of the session, you should be able to distinguish 4 of the CDC categories of barrier methods. You should be able to demonstrate proper use of both internal and external condoms, and then also be able to identify 3 factors that may encourage use of barrier methods. So why is this important and why are we doing this? One is barrier methods offer options both for birth control and STI prevention. Some do both, some do one or the other, which we'll get into those specifics. And it's important that as people who work in the public health realm and sphere, that you can educate, you can demonstrate, and you can improve access to folks for barrier methods. In particular, these methods are not always as well understood because of some of their historical context, and so it's important that folks know all of their options for their own protection and use. And also another rationale is that this will help everyone better recognize those gaps in understanding, not only for yourself, because if you as a public health worker have gaps in this in these offerings in understanding, then we need to expect that patients also have many of those gaps. And so recognizing what you need to know, and then also helping recognize what understanding or myths people might have about barrier methods. Okay. So, as I mentioned, there are 2 main categories for barrier methods. One is as birth control, but then there also are barrier methods that really focus on STI prevention, and of course some that do both. So we're going to jump in here first to birth control. So the 4 categories that are considered birth control options with barrier methods are condoms, which include both external and internal condoms, spermicides, sponge, and then the diaphragm and cap. So we're going to jump into each of these individually and cover a lot of information about some specifics, and then we'll jump over into STI prevention. Okay. As we get into these specifics here, I realize I want to ask a few questions of you all, and I'm not sure if I'll be able to see all the answers to this. If you could type into the chat real quick, just kind of help me out, what sort of role you play in the public health sphere. If you could type that in for us. Actually, I'm going to jump out of this real quick. Sorry, apologize, Jordan.
Not a problem. I'm happy to read out the responses to you as well, if that's easier.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, let's do that.
Yeah. We have an STD data manager at Indiana DOH, HIV prevention specialist, another DIS in Indiana. They're coming in quick now. Reproductive health, youth development coordinator, an outreach specialist. There's so many. PrEP navigator, another STD prevention specialist, HIV testing, counseling, lots of DIS, public health nurse. Let's see here, community health educator.
Oh, I actually just was able to pull it up now.
Perfect. Yeah, there are a lot.
Awesome. Then I'm going to ask as well, if you could tell me how long you've been in the field. This will give me a good idea as we jump into this. Folks all over, this is great. Okay, awesome. This is what I was hoping for. We got a big mix of folks. 20 years, wow. Yep, a couple of months. Okay, awesome. Thank you so much. And then last thing I'm going to ask is, what is one myth or question that you have about barrier methods? Just something you've heard or sort of some of the first things that come into your mind when you think about barrier methods. Okay, so it looks like some people are saying not as effective for birth control, inconvenient, reduced sensation. Okay. Okay, but myth that they're not needed if you're on birth control or PrEP. Okay, yep. Not large enough. Yeah, I was talking about condoms there. Okay. So someone asked about why they only ever hear about condoms and digital dams. Yeah, so we'll get into some of that. Okay, awesome. Thank you so much. Yeah, feel free to continue to include some of those. And then I'm going to go ahead and get started on some more information about condoms. So condoms have, we've actually two different forms of condoms. Most of the time, people hear about external condoms or what have traditionally been called male condoms. You are going to hear me use mostly gender neutral information here, especially because we want to be as inclusive as possible. So we are going to work through these various methods. The language does matter, and it's important that we use language that best sets our clients and patients up for feeling safe, included, and of course, part of the interaction. This will take some practice, especially for those of you who have been in this field for a while, but I think it is important that we have opportunity to practice using language that is more inclusive, and I hope that you will continue to consider future changes as our culture and knowledge and understanding evolves. Okay. So here we go into external condoms. So external condoms, or male condoms, as most of you are familiar with, condoms are interesting because, of course, they do prevent pregnancy, but also prevent STIs. So these are one that cross categories here for barrier methods. So they are placed on the external genitalia, which is why we call them external condoms. They can be used at any time in relation to sexual activity, as well as related to pregnancy. Some methods can only be used within certain weeks of a person after having a baby. And so condoms, of course, can be used anytime, which is something that is, of course, a benefit for them. But at typical use, and all the percentages I'm going to be giving today are typical use, meaning the average that a person, when using this, how effective it is at preventing pregnancy. Perfect use, which is another percentage that you'll see sometimes in research, looks at more controlled environments and how the actual method itself prevents pregnancy in a perfect world. However, we don't live in a perfect world. public health is not a perfect world, as you all know, and our patients are not living in a perfect world, and our clients. And so it's important that we really look at that typical use, because this is a much better measure to talk with people about real world scenarios. So the male condom or the external condom is made of a thin sheath of usually latex is the most common form that you'll see. There's also polyurethane, which is a plastic, and then there are also more natural or animal membranes that can be used as well, especially for people with allergies. Sheepskin is one that you'll see, although you probably won't see it because it's pretty challenging to find. These do offer the best protection against STIs and have been around for a very long time. These also do include prevention from HIV as well as amongst the STIs. They do come in all different colors, sizes, with all the various attributes or features. As mentioned, they're cheap, often free. I would imagine most of you in your places of employment offer condoms for free to clients. If you don't have condoms available, external condoms available to your clients, find a way. There are lots of resources that I know many of the people on this webinar right now would be able to share of options for getting condoms and different methods of distribution, which we won't be getting into today. A couple other benefits with external condoms is that there are no effect on any hormones, since it is a non-hormonal option, and lube does matter. So with latex condoms, and you're going to hear this several times throughout today's presentation, anything made of latex, you do not want to use oil with. No oil-based lubricants. The oil can and will over time break down the latex and will actually cause weaknesses or potentially holes in the condoms or anything made of latex, and can cause the condom to break during the sexual activity. So that is something that's really important to note. So water-based lubricants or silicone-based lubricants are the best to use with anything made with latex. This is something that I think a lot of people, if they have heard, assume everyone knows, and that is not the case. So make sure that that's something that you point out. Especially there's a big trend of using coconut oil as a lubricant. Excuse me. The coconut oil will break down the latex, and I have a goddaughter now because of that. So make sure that that is something that you're communicating with to your clients and patients. Okay, I'm going to move on now to internal condoms. Internal condoms are the much lesser known of the condoms, often called female condoms. Again, these are placed internally into internal genitalia or can be used anally into the rectum. It is a thin plastic pouch that lines either the vaginal opening or the rectum. It is held in place by a closed inner ring at the cervix and then an outer ring at the opening of the vagina or the front hole, as you might hear me use terminology as well, or the anus. Again, these can be used at any time related to pregnancy and have a 79% effective rate with typical use. These are typically made out of polyurethane. So that is a nice perk with internal condoms, is that they are not made of latex. And so with latex allergies, internal condoms are a good option. I am going to be doing a demonstration later today, showing you both external and internal condoms. And so I know a lot of people who have never been able to actually see or work with an internal condom. I'll be able to show you that later on. So we'll cover some of these details a little bit more. There are minimal studies on STI prevention for the internal condom. So while these are a good option for pregnancy, they do offer some prevention from STI. We just don't have a lot of data on it right now. However, that being said, you never want to use an internal condom with an external condom. Because of the two materials and the friction between can actually cause tears in either or both of the materials, therefore not making that very effective. So making sure that if someone is using an internal condom, that they're only using that and that their partner is not using an external condom in conjunction with it. These do have more options, obviously, for lube, since it is not made of latex. They are a little bit more expensive and difficult to find. One neat thing about internal condoms, however, is that they actually can be used. You can get them by prescription, which is unique for condoms. There are probably few providers who know that that's even an option. And so I think that's something important to let providers know who have that prescriptive authority that they can provide it, because then insurance will cover the cost of those with certain plans. They can be purchased at any stores that you can find condoms, so convenience stores or health stores, just general grocery stores as well. Usually if you go, you'll see all the condoms. You'll have 100 different external condom options, and then you'll see maybe if you can find them internal condoms near the bottom of the shelf. Another good thing, no effect on hormones, and it does give more control to the receptive partner. We hear the conversation a lot of like, well, my partner who's penis bearing, didn't have a condom, and so we didn't use one. So either one, it's important that regardless of who's going to be using the condom, that these are available for folks, and that it does give more of that control and power to the receptive partner to have more security in the sexual activity. And they also can be placed ahead of time, and so that is something that, as with the spontaneity potentially of external condoms and needing to have an erection for that, an internal condom can be put in place ahead of time so that you can continue on with the activity and folks can have the experience that they're wanting. Little interesting fun fact about internal condoms. I was curious if you type in the chat, what do you think the earliest mention of internal condoms is in recorded history? Go ahead and type in your guess for the earliest mention of internal condoms. I love little sexual health fun facts. So type in your guess. Before the Bible, ancient Egypt, 995, AK, 1850. Oh, 1850. Something's really going on there. 1950, 1960. Okay, ancient Greece. So, Miranda, you are correct. The first historical mention of the internal condom actually does come from Greek mythology, where the god Minos inserts a goat's bladder into his mistress to catch his poisonous ejaculatory fluid, as it says. And so, long time history of something like the internal condom, obviously very different from what we have today. And in the 1920s, they created a thick rubber version of the internal condom, and it kind of resembled a sheath that was designed to rest inside the vaginal canal. The one that we know today was actually approved by the FDA in 1993. So several, you were right on many counts, for internal condoms. It was made of polyurethane. It was actually designed to be washed and reused. However, people really didn't like it because it made a weird noise and it had a really high price point. And so it did not really take off until much later, when they changed some of the formulations of it and how it was used. So yeah, fun fact about internal condoms. I should mention internal condoms only to be used once. Unlike the precedent from the 90s, these are only meant to be used one time and then thrown away. Okay, so now we're going to move on to the next method, which is spermicides. So spermicides actually, which sound a little odd when you think about barrier methods, but they create a chemical barrier for the sperm to prevent it from getting to the egg. A couple things to note about spermicides. These should be used generally in conjunction with other devices, but they can be used on their own as well. But they are more effective when used with some of these other barrier methods that we'll discuss here in a little bit. They are to be used with they need to be used with every sex act. And it's important that you read the instructions on the product. Some need about 10 to 15 minutes before sex, before the actual sexual activity or the penetration happens to be effective, and they last for about 1 hour. So if multiple sex acts are happening over time, then the spermicide needs to be reapplied. And as you can see, there's a 72% effective rate. There's a lot more management going on, especially if a lot of time passes in between. The most common chemical used is nonoxynol 9, which is very effective at killing sperm. However, it can cause some irritation when used repeatedly, so that is something to be mindful of. This is the product that you will see nonoxynol 9 here in the United States most commonly, and so it's important to much like using a cleaning supply on furniture, a small spot, use a little bit, see if there's any kind of reaction or irritation before inserting a large amount of it, because a lot of people are not used to that chemical, and it can cause that irritation over time. They come in all different forms: foams, gels, creams, suppositories, films, tablets, all sorts of different options for people. And so that's something that if someone is looking to use spermicide and have had any issues with, you can encourage folks to look at the different kinds that are available, so that they can see what works for them. Spermicides are generally pretty cheap and available over the counter. It's something that a lot of people, because of a lot of the shame and stigma around sex and sexual activity, especially for options that people do have in their own power, that's something that folks often don't know about, that is even an option for them. And so I encourage folks to go into their local stores, peruse what options they have, and really take some time with what's available. Spermicides, like the other options, do not have any effects on hormones. As mentioned, they can cause that irritation or allergic reaction. And because of that, they're not recommended for people living with HIV or those who are at high risk. The reason is because with multiple uses of nonoxynol 9 product, it can actually cause lesions in the tissue, whether vaginally or rectally. And so because of that, it can lead to more viral shedding for the person who is not living with HIV. And then for folks at risk, could put them more at risk for acquiring HIV using a spermicide. So generally not recommended for, again, folks living with HIV or at high risk, but could be used in moderation. Okay, let's move on here. Buttons will work. There we go. Okay, and now we'll move to the third method for birth control. So we're looking at the sponge. So the sponge is, it's a round device made of soft foam that contains a spermicide. It is inserted into the vagina or front hole to cover the cervix and keep sperm from entering the uterus, not the universe. I have a sponge with me. I'm going to show it here, just kind of for reference. It is squishy like a sponge. You see here this kind of loop, and so when it is inserted, placed inside, it kind of naturally opens up, and in this divot here is where the cervix would rest. And so then the string part would be towards the external opening, so that for removal, you would reach up and pull out the sponge. So this is obviously a method that people have to be very comfortable with inserting items into their front hole. And so for some people, this is not an option for that reason, but just kind of give you a reference point of what that looks like. This is not recommended until 6 weeks postpartum because of the changes with birth, that the sponge can actually become loose and dislodged and therefore not be effective for preventing pregnancy. Like I said, it does have the spermicide in the matrix of this foam. And so for that reason, it's nice because you don't have to reapply spermicide like you would with one by itself or with some of the other products. So it can be used for multiple sex acts within 24 hours. And it does need to stay in place for at least 6 hours afterwards in order to get that higher effective rate. But you can see again, with only 76 to 88% effective because of some of the error, room for error with for these methods. It is also available over the counter, although there is a caveat to that. So currently, as far as I'm aware, the only manufacturer of the sponge right now in the United States is called the Today sponge. However, they've had some manufacturing issues with their machine since 2019. And then with all the changes with the pandemic, since then, they have not been able to produce the sponge. And so there has been a sponge shortage. And so they are, if at all possible to find, nearly impossible. So the Today sponge, this is a good option. There are people who love it and swear by it, but it's a lot of people have had to switch to other options. And also then, of course, for people who are interested in it, not available. So that's something that to keep an eye on if the sponge, if and when it becomes available again. It also has no effect on hormones because of the spermicide may cause irritation or allergic reaction. So again, caution should be used. And because of that, also not recommended for people living with HIV or at high risk. And as well, toxic shock syndrome has been reported in a few cases while people are menstruating. And so it is not recommended to be used on someone's period. However, that is rare and of course just should not be left in for long periods of time. And just to give some little context on this, sponge, a pack of 3 runs about $10 to $12. So just so you're aware kind of on some of these other methods and how accessible they are for people. Okay. Now we'll move on to caps and diaphragms. So we put these two together. They function in very similar ways and work very similarly. And the reason that I put these last is because these are also only available by prescription. All the other methods we've mentioned so far can be purchased over the counter, but caps and diaphragms have to be fit by a healthcare provider. And so we're going to jump into a little bit more on some of the specifics here. So the diaphragm is a small dome-shaped device that's made of either silicone or latex, and that fits inside the vagina and covers the cervix. And it must be used with a spermicide. So you can see here in the photo that you add the spermicide to the ring and also inside the dome, squeeze it, insert, and it goes up against the cervix and sort of covers the cervix completely, holding the spermicide around there as well, so that if any sperm were to get around the diaphragm, then the spermicide, kind of a tag team situation there. So these are not, similarly to the sponge, not recommended until at least 6 weeks postpartum because of the changes in the body, and they are about 88% effective with typical use. These also can be used for multiple sex acts within 24 hours, but the spermicide does need to be reapplied with an applicator. Something that looks about like this, filled with spermicide that can be inserted while the diaphragm still stays in place, and then also needs to stay in place for 6 hours after, but not more than 24 hours because of some of the pressure and of course risk for infection as well. These are prescription only, so that's a barrier point and gatekeeping that can happen with diaphragms. Most must be fit for size. There is one that is a one size fits all option out there, but still has to be prescribed. And something that is can be more challenging with the diaphragm is that it does have to be refit after several things, like a gain or loss of 10 pounds after having a baby, or any kind of pelvic or abdominal surgery because of potential changes. So that's another reason that diaphragms have more so fallen out of favor because of all the extra sort of work and hoops that have to be jumped through. These also have no effect on hormones. They may cause irritation or that allergic action because of the spermicide. And lube does matter. As I mentioned, these can be made of latex, and so making sure that you're avoiding any oil-based lubricants. And so diaphragms, because they are used for, these are multi-use devices, you do need to check for holes by holding it up to the light and see if any light comes through on the diaphragm. And then they are replaced according to the brand. There are a few brands out there, although it can be challenging to find, again, because they have to be prescription, and there are a lot of providers who are not accustomed or trained in how to fit diaphragms. Okay, same note, because of the spermicide for folks living with HIV, and the same with the toxic shock syndrome. Okay. So now we'll move on to caps. Very similar. These caps are a small plastic dome that again fit over the cervix. They are smaller, and so they stay in place via suction around the cervix. So it also acts as a barrier to keep sperm from entering the uterus, and it should be used with spermicide as well. I have one version of them right here, so you can see kind of the size. It is quite pliable and squishy. And then you can see here, I know it's a little hard on camera, there's a little loop here. And so similarly, this is squeezed, inserted, and then once it's placed up, it will open up around the cervix in this divot here. And then this loop is used to withdraw the cap. So you can see, again, you have to be very comfortable with internal insertion to be able to use an option like this. Also made of latex or silicone, same as the diaphragm, not recommended till 6 weeks postpartum, and about 77 to 83% effective. Can also be used for multiple sex acts, same with the spermicide, and these can actually stay in, can be used, but not more than 48 hours. So that is a unique benefit to the cap. Because of the size of it, it can be left in place longer than the diaphragm or the sponge. Again, have to be sized for fitting via prescription and have to be refit as well. Although they are a little bit more lenient with some of the changes because of where they sit in the body as compared to the diaphragm. There are no effects on hormones. They may cause irritation, allergic reaction due to the spermicide. Again, lube matters with these, and generally caps are replaced yearly. So checking for holes as well, especially with any oil-based lube, and same considerations as before with the diaphragm. Okay. Now, we're going to move on now to barrier methods that cover more about when we look at STI prevention rather than pregnancy, but continue to be barrier options. So again, STI and other skin-to-skin prevention for barrier methods. So first, we're going to start on dental dams. So a lot of people ask, why is it called a dental dam? So dental dams are a thin layer that is used to use for cunnilingus, oral sex, and also can be used for analingus or rim jobs. And so it's interesting that the dental dam is actually invented in 1864. That was for dental procedures, dental practice. So the dental dam was used to actually separate one tooth in the mouth and protect against contamination. So if the dentist was working just on a particular area of the mouth, they would use the dental dam then to prevent any other cross-contamination or issues with other teeth. And it wasn't until the late 80s, 1980s that is, during the rise of the HIV epidemic, that actually the public use, we started using them for oral sex. It was women who are having sex with women were saying, hey, like, we don't know quite what risk we might be at for HIV, and wanted something that was going to be more useful for potentially preventing HIV and of course now other STIs. And so that's where dental dams came from. I will say, if you've never looked up photos of dental dams used in actual dentistry, it is bizarre. There's something about seeing those images. Feel free to now on your own time go and look at those photos, but they are a little unnerving in my opinion. So heads up on that. These, as I said, come in sheets and also do come in wearables. And because they are often made of latex, something to be wary of with allergies. They also do come in polyurethane as well. So that is something to keep in mind. The wearables I wanted to discuss a little bit. This is a newer development in the dental dam arena. As far as I'm aware, there's a couple brands out there. One of them is actually based here in Indiana, and they sort of come in an underwear option. They are all very feminine presenting underwear. So just be aware of that for folks who may still be interested in something like that. They are currently, as far as I can tell, marketed more to cis women. So that's something definitely we want to see more diversity in. But these products, one of them was actually a company called Laurel's. They received FDA clearance in 2022, this year, for their protection line, and it is made of latex. And so, excuse me, it does have FDA clearance for STI prevention. And so this gives people different options that they can use with any kind of oral activity, so that they can continue to have fun and not have to mess with an actual piece of latex or polyurethane during the sexual activity. So just something to be aware of. They run about $10 to $20 a pair. So that's generally are not to be used again. And so something to be aware as a price point, but also an option for people. There also are full body play or protection suits made of latex that some people can use as well, depending on the type of prevention they're looking to have. Some people will use something like this for STI prevention, also more in kink or sexual play. And so it's something that folks can consider as a use that, again, can be sexy and fun. Okay, now we're going to move on to gloves and finger cots. Gloves and finger cots are another great option for people who do want to engage in sexual activity, but again, prevent STIs. So especially useful for manual activities, things like fingering any orifice or hand jobs, things like that, that potentially could spread some of your skin-to-skin STIs. These are really helpful, especially even if you might have a partner monogamous relationship, or someone who might be what we call fluid bonded with their partner. If you have an abrasion or a lesion, long fingernails, any kind of jewelry, things like that that can't be removed, using a glove, just like a nitrile glove or latex glove, again, checking for allergies, could be used. Finger cots essentially are just the finger portion of a glove, and they come in little packets. They look like tiny external condoms, but they're meant to just be rolled down onto the finger. And so folks can use any number of finger cots for any kind of manual stimulation or activity. A little pro tip on these is that if someone does have long fingernails, but wants to have protection on their hands, they can actually put cotton balls into the ends or the tips of the gloves or the finger cot, to not only to pad the nail, but it also gives a little additional length to the finger. So depending on the type of stimulation they're going for, can help protect them and their partner from any kind of cuts or lesions, and also keeping the glove or finger caught intact on their fingers. So a lot of options there for prevention. Okay. And last, I want to talk about DIY options. So I know that in public health and healthcare in general, we like things to be very official. We want them to be approved. We want them to be studied. And that is not always an option for folks when it comes to their sexual health and the options that they have, especially when things are getting hot and heavy and there may not be options available to people. So DIY options, while less studied, they are still good options for people, especially with access issues or resource issues, things that they can do to get a little creative. So I wanted to go over a few options, DIY options, including one, turning a condom into a dental dam, turning a glove into a dental dam, and then also want to talk about plastic wrap, which I know probably a lot of people are going to balk at, but it does at least help. Risk reduction, right? That's what we that's the world we live in, and especially in the sexual health world. So just to give you an idea here, for condom to a dental dam, the way to do that, take the condom out of the package, cutting off the tip, cutting off the ring, which can be optional depending on the type of condom that it is, and then cutting through just one side of the condom. And then there you've got essentially a dental dam, remembering that they will have some lubricant on there. So making sure that whoever is using on either end, that you're checking for allergies and pieces like that. But that is something that can be used in a pinch, especially because dental dams are a little less easy to find or available. And so using condom is a great way to do that. The same thing can be done turning a glove into a dental dam, simply by removing the fingers and cutting through to make a sheet from the palm and back of the hand section of the glove, is another great way. You can apply lube to one side and use that to enjoy any kind of oral activity. Plastic wrap. Now, it is important to use non-microwavable plastic wrap. And the reason for that is because microwavable plastic wrap has tiny holes in it for the steam and air to escape. And therefore, making the method not really an option for STI prevention. So if someone is going to use plastic wrap, make sure it is non-microwavable. But again, another option to help prevent some of that skin-to-skin transmission of STIs. Curious if there are any other options that people have or know about, or things you've heard maybe from clients about things that they've used as barrier methods for STI prevention. While anyone's typing, I'm going to go through a couple questions in here. Anne asks if there is an expiration date on dental dams. The answer is yes. Dental dams have the same care as condoms, which we'll go over a little bit here with our demonstration. But yes, they do have expiration dates because of the material does break down over time. And so dental dams are also one-time use and do have an expiration date. So that's something that's important to check. Okay, feel free to type in any ideas that you have. If you know of any other DIY options or other forms, I love hearing what's out there. Okay. So now I'm going to move into the condom demo. Got my supplies here. So I'm gonna go over the steps here. The main things, as I just mentioned, check the expiration date. That is important. All condoms have it. Make sure that you teach people that. A lot of people are not used to actually looking at the packaging of the condom. And so, seeing the lot number and things like that, and then the way they're printed is, even if they're cut strangely, you'll always be able to find the expiration date. So this one actually expired in May of 2021, which is why I'm using it in this demonstration. So another way to, good thing for all condoms, internal or external, is also checking to see, can squish and feel that little bit of air in between. If there is not that little pocket or pouch of air, that means that there is a hole somewhere in the packaging because the air has been able to escape and therefore contaminants have been able to get in. So that's something that's always good for yourself and to teach folks to check on their condoms. Obviously check about latex allergy, since most external condoms are made of latex. Again, the lube matters, making sure that you're not using oil with latex, and of course have extras. Things happen, condoms get lost, they come off, they break. So it's important that people have multiple condoms with them with any sexual activity. Okay, so I know that many of you are very accustomed and comfortable with external condoms. I'm sure most of you teach classes on how to put on condoms, but obviously we have got a wide spread of people from all different backgrounds and time in public health and sexual health. So I thought this is one of the most useful things that we could do today. So you've got your condom. Feel free, if you have one nearby, to go along with me. You're going to open the condom, and the important thing is to remember is that you want to open the condom, camera here, from one of the edges. All condoms are designed to be torn with just hands and not with scissors. People will try that, or they'll use nail clippers to try to open them. I really encourage people to just use their hands if possible. If they, for some reason, have a lot of lube or fluids on their hands, then they can use like the edge of their shirt or a sheet to grab and open that. Some people will use their teeth, which I recommend not using, but people do what they have to get the condom. So again, risk reduction. So grabbing the edge here, pulling down to one side, and then you should see that the condom was not affected by that at all. So then taking the condom out. Now condoms are rolled in one direction, and while technically they can be applied either way, it is very challenging and they're not designed that way. And so you want to look to make sure that you're pulling it to where the natural roll goes. So you'll see the tip here. So the recommendation is to then pinch the tip to get out any air, and then place the condom with the tip still in your fingers on the head of the penis, and then using the other hand, or once it's placed on, then rolling down the condom onto the erect penis as far down as it will go. And so you'll still see some condom left over because condoms are generally meant to accommodate multiple sizes of penises or external genitalia. So so pinching out, unroll the condom, and then after the sexual activity happens, and of course, it's always good to check periodically throughout a sexual activity to make sure that the condom still is intact. Condoms can break, especially if not enough lubricant is used, or if an oil-based lubricant is used that can cause the condom to break. And so important to remind people to check throughout sexual activity to make sure the condom is still in place. So then when pulling out, grabbing the base of the condom here while the penis is removed from the orifice, and then removing the condom just involves rolling it back up or pulling it off depending on the state of the penis at that time. And then best thing is to remind people that these need to be thrown away in the trash and not to be flushed. Another good tip that is not required but can be done is to actually then tie off the condom to keep the contents inside, depending on where they're at and what kind of activity might be important to prevent contamination or sperm accidentally spilling out in other sexual activities. So that is the basics of the external condom demonstration. And now then the internal condom. Okay, so I've got here my internal orifice, just to kind of show you here, clear plastic. I know on camera it's not the best, but that's all we got. So this is one of the brands of internal condom, and really the most common one that you'll see, the FC2. Most of them still say female condom, but you will actually, they are changing their packaging to say internal condom. So that's something to note, that is a change to make it more inclusive. So with this same opening from the side, it has a little tear here mark on there, so you know exactly where to go. So taking the internal condom out, and you'll see here, I'm going to kind of open it up just so you can see insides here. So there is an internal ring, and this thick internal ring is removable. Okay, kind of looks like a hair tie, but it is much thicker than that, but it's about that size. So generally speaking, that internal ring will sit at the bottom of the condom if being used for vaginal or front hole sex. So if so, then the inner ring is then squeezed and inserted once a person is in a comfortable position, inserted inside by the user. And then once it is past the labia and into the vaginal canal, then it will open up to kind of give it some security within the vagina to keep it in place. And so then the outer ring then is kept on the inside of the body. Okay, so I'm going to show you here, squeezing the internal ring, placing it inside, and then using a finger to push it back until the ring gets into place. And so you'll see it kind of, obviously this is not anatomically accurate completely, but so you can see the internal ring inside, and then the external ring, which is much wider, stays on the outside. Something that the internal condom also provides that external condoms do not, that not only does it prevent pregnancy and offers some STI prevention, but also because of the outer ring covering the labia or the external anal tissue, can actually provide some skin-to-skin barrier and prevention there from some STIs. So then the ring is held either while the partner inserts with their penis, and that can be held in place until the person is inserted. It is important to note that that they need to stop and reassess if for some reason that this inner ring gets pushed to the side. If a person pulls out, they can actually then push against the side of it, and then of course you're not offering any protection. Or if they pull out too much and the inner ring gets pushed inside, the condom then can be pushed inside. If that happens, it can be easily removed and then reset, but that is something that is important for people to be aware of when using an internal condom. If the internal condom is used for anal sex, which it can be, what the key difference is, you want to remove the inner ring. Get rid of this. The internal ring should not be used for anal sex. And then how it can be placed, either the person can insert it with their fingers, or they can actually insert it with their partner's penis or toy or whatever it is that they're inserting for anal sex. And so that way then it's sort of in a way gets used as an external condom for the placement, but then it is held in place by the body, and the outer ring then stays on the outside and can be held by the partner. So to remove either from front hole or anal sex, you just twist the outer ring, okay, to kind of close it off, and then just remove and throw it away, just like you would an external condom. Okay, feel free to type in any questions about that. I'm going to go ahead and move to our last few slides here, and then we'll get to some questions. Last little bit, I just wanted to note to you all, what can you do in these scenarios? Obviously, barrier methods, while many of them have been around for many years, a lot of them lost in they dipped in popularity because as a birth control method, as you can see from the stats, they're not the best method. They have a lot of room for error, human error, and have to be used in very specific ways, with some of them with many steps involved, and allergies and things like that, and access to them. So something that is important, but I think for people in public health, is a few ways that you can ensure that people, one, know about these options, because they can't choose something they don't know exists, and two, understanding that a lot of these can be used in conjunction with other forms of birth control, and especially because of their superiority in STI prevention, which you're not going to see with other forms of birth control. This is where this unique place that barrier methods come into place, especially in the public health realm with STI prevention. Now, people are allowed to make their own decisions. People have to have that autonomy, and that's really important, especially depending on your position and place of power, honestly, in the public health sphere, to make sure that that you are not using any kind of coercive language, fear or shame, things like that around barrier methods when it comes to STI prevention and pregnancy prevention. Empowering people with knowledge and understanding, and especially access to resources, is really important. Motivational interviewing is a way that you can work with people. That's a technique that anyone can get trained on how to do counseling related to STI and pregnancy prevention. And really, it takes a more empathetic approach to talking with clients and patients about their options and methods, and really looking at what are their own intrinsic motivators for using a method, whether that's pregnancy prevention, STI prevention, or both. And so that's a method that I recommend if you haven't ever looked at before, as an option that evidence does show is a great way to help people with making that decision, as well as then shared decision making. And again, forcing an option or only presenting certain options that you might have a bias to, or that you think is better for a person, does not ultimately result in more use of that method. And so it's important to be able to share all the information with folks and give them all the resources so that they can make the best decision for themselves at any given time, which may of course change over time as well. As I mentioned, additionally, a lot of these methods are kind of hard to find because either they're not available via manufacturing, or because of their popularity. So I encourage you that wherever you are located, go to your local stores, see what options are available in some of over-the-counter options, to see where people can get those. Because if you don't have them available outside of probably external condoms, and you're wanting to tell people about some of these other methods, then it's important that you know where in your community they're available to direct people to, and to break down many of those barriers that people have for these methods. The other thing I would recommend too is, if you have access to some of the family planning providers in your area, asking them, do they do diaphragms or caps? Do they offer those as a resource for people for a barrier method? Because that's another way that you can help direct people to the right places, because not all care providers do. I think that's important to note. So making sure that you look at your options in your local community. For the links and resources, we will be sending this out afterwards, so be able to click on this link. This will have links to all the sources where I got my information, as well as a few resources that that offer some patient facing and also just educational options that I really like. One of my favorites is called Ojoy Sex Toy website. I encourage you to look it up. It's a couple of illustrators and they do amazing work when it comes to sexual health and in particular with barrier methods. And it's a really great, easy, fun way for people to get the information. It's very inclusive with all different age representation, race and ethnicity, body types, queer bodies, things like that. So yeah, Ojoy Sex Toy is one of my favorites. Okay, any questions for me? I'm going to go ahead and with our last 15 minutes, go to the Q&A. Here's my contact information. Feel free to email me at daniel@thetalkcounseling.com. I don't mind a phone call or a text as well. I'm pretty personal. And then also you can find me on LinkedIn there as Daniel Stec. So thank you so much, everyone. And we will transition to questions now.
Thank you so much, Daniel. That was wonderful. We do have a few questions in the chat as well in the Q&A, but I've been keeping track. Somebody asked, do condoms expire or degrade in their sealed packaging?
You said, I didn't hear that. You broke up a little bit there last bit.
Sorry about that. Yeah, do condoms expire or do they degrade in their sealed packaging?
Yes, condoms do expire. So all condoms have an expiration date as internal and external and genital dams. They can degrade. Important thing to note, one of the biggest things is to keep condoms in a cool, dry place. So if a condom has been kept in the sun or at higher temperatures, that actually can break them down quicker. And so that's something really important to note, especially for those who have the condoms and are holding them in, like a public health space, making sure that if you have them set like on your counter or in a public space, that it's not somewhere where the sun comes in and cooks them essentially throughout the day. So making sure that you keep in mind with that. But yes, they can break down. Again, a condom is better than no condom, even if it's expired. But that's why it's important to make sure that the supplies that we're giving out in the public health sphere are all still with months of life still in them. But yes, they can break down. Important to check and make sure and use lots of lube.
Awesome, thank you. Next question, are there risks to removing the inner ring of the internal condom before using it for vaginal sex?
Risks of removing it before vaginal sex.
Correct.
So it can be used without the ring for vaginal or front hole sex. The idea is that the ring, because of the anatomy of the vagina, the ring really helps keep the condom in place to prevent it from moving and especially from coming out. If the partner removes their penis or toy from the canal, it can sometimes come with it if the internal ring is not inside. And so that's the risk of removing it. Otherwise, it still, will work, and depending on the type of sex and the positioning and all those types of things. So it's something that people could kind of play with and see if it still works for them, but just ensuring that it stays inside. So that's the main risk of removing the ring for vaginal. The reason for internal or for anally is because the ring coming out can be a bit more challenging because of the anatomy of the anus. The ring, you don't want that inside because it can, and of course you wouldn't want it to break inside the rectum because then it would be lost and that would be bad.
Thank you. And before I forget, I do want to say, if anyone would like to ask a question out loud, if you raise your hand using the raise your hand feature, I'm happy to unmute you, but we do have a couple other questions. Someone asked why you are using the term front hole.
Yeah, so it's a great question. Thank you for asking. So the term front hole, the reason that I use that in addition or sometimes in place of vaginal or vulva is because those words are very gendered, and there are a lot of folks who maybe have anatomy that has a vagina or vulva, but that terminology can be really dysphoric for them. So for instance, maybe folks who are non-binary or are trans-masculine. And so that's why I like to use more inclusive language like front hole, because not all clients, patients, individuals use that terminology for their own anatomy. And so making sure that when you're talking with a client or patient, regardless of how they present or what you perceive their gender to be, it's really important that you ask folks what are the terminology that they use for their own body parts. Because if you're educating someone and using a term that they don't identify with, or that might be causing them harm or discomfort, then what's the point? You're not only not getting them the information, but also causing them harm. And so that's where using a term like front hole is something that's just for all people, a little more general and applicable for folks. So yeah, there are lots of trainings on more inclusive language when it comes to sex and bodies and sexual health. But that's why I use that terminology here.
Thank you. That was also the first time I heard that term, so it's good to hear that explanation.
Yeah.
And then the last question that's come through, but folks, please continue to ask your questions if you have them, is where do you get the demo for the internal condom?
Oh, that's a great question. I've had this for a while. So there is a website. I'll type it in the chat. I think I can. This one in particular is called the O Cube. And it is specifically meant for internal condom usage. So it's just www.ocube.info. I'm just reading that right now. Boop. So that is where this one comes from. I have not, in full disclosure, been to that website. So it's written on here, and I've had this for a while. So yeah, this is the O Cube. Great tool to have. Yeah, because internal condoms are less common and less known, so a lot of people see them and are just like, I have no idea what to do. So yeah, and it just inflate it, squishes down. It's really easy to take with you in your kits, your sex education kits. Yeah, great tool to have. Thanks for asking that.
Awesome. Yeah, I love that too. Some of the other demonstrators are big and bulky, hard to transport.
Yeah, super easy.
Yeah. Another question. Do you have any resources that you recommend for folks on using more inclusive language when counseling on sexual health?
Yes, I'm trying to think some of the best ones right now. There are a ton of resources out there. There is the Transgender Training Institute, which is one that I also have some personal connections with. They put out some really incredible material. I can add a few of those to the resource link since that's a live document, but the Transgender Training Institute is great. They have all sorts of options. There's a ton of stuff online from various groups that give you options for how to use that more inclusive language. There also are some local trainers. I know in Indianapolis and throughout Indiana that will come in and do training for you or your group if you're wanting to do that. And thank you for asking, because that's so important. Because the more that we can use language that is inclusive of all people, the better we are, right? If we make things easiest for those who have some of the biggest barriers or the least access, or who historically have been harmed by healthcare and public health communities, then it's really important that we do our due diligence to find ways that we can better serve and care for those most vulnerable.
Thank you. All right, those are all the questions that have come through. We do have a few more minutes, so I just want to give folks space to ask anything else. All right, I'm not seeing anything come through on the chat or the Q&A, but if you think of anything later, you do have Daniel's contact information there on the screen. I'll be sending out an evaluation later today, and if you're wishing to receive nursing contact hours, you have to fill that out. And if you're not, we still really appreciate your feedback, always helps inform future trainings. But yeah, we really appreciate you all being here today, and thank you so much, Daniel, for the wonderful presentation.
Thank you, Jordan, and thank you everyone for coming. Feel free to reach out if you need anything.
And I'll leave the webinar going for just a little bit longer. So if anyone wants to copy down the contact information, they can. All right, folks seem to be dropping off, so I'm gonna close this out.